sea level and the potential melting of portions of Greenland and Antarctica, specifically West Antarctica, is the portion that is most unstable. That we could push these to the point where we get a rapid collapse of most likely West Antarctica and also the southern half of Greenland. So it's hard to say how long it will take to get a large sea level change, but with so-called business as usual global warming, business as usual 2% per year increase in fossil fuel use, we would expect at least 3 degrees Celsius global warming. The last time the world was 3 degrees Celsius warmer was a few million years ago during the Middle Pliocene, and sea level then was 25 plus or minus 10 meters higher than it is now, and that's 80 feet. Now that's something that obviously we don't want to be headed in that direction. There's a big disagreement among scientists about how long it takes ice sheets to respond to the changed forcing. And IPCC has come out, this Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, you've probably heard about them in the news recently, and they've come out with estimates for very small increases in sea level this century. Well, they're only have quantified the thermal expansion of the ocean and the melting alpine glaciers. They have simply not dealt with this Greenland Antarctic problem because it's difficult. But it's by far the greatest threat as far as sea level is concerned. And in my opinion, as a physicist, I cannot imagine how West Antarctica or the southern half of Greenland could survive if we follow business as usual. And we know from the Earth's history, if we look at the last time an ice sheet disintegrated, was the Laurentide ice sheet in central Canada 14,700 years ago. And sea level then, during meltwater pulse 1A, sea level went up 20 meters in 400 years. So that's 1 meter every 20 years. So when an ice sheet disintegrates, it can disintegrate very rapidly. But in this case, I don't think that we scientists have done a very good job of making clear the dangers that are involved. And I think that special interests deserve a double demerit because they've been very effective both through the media and on the government in preventing the actions that are needed from occurring, and they've left the public confused. So although all of these categories, I think, bear some of the responsibility, but unfortunately it's going to be the young people who are going to pay in the future. Well, I think IPCC is necessary, and it, on some of the issues, it tends to be maybe a little behind in the case of recognizing that the world is really getting warmer, and it's due to humans. It's just about there now.
Yeah, exactly. Very likely, they said.
It's very likely. Yeah. But that's useful. I mean, it's used because you can then say, well, there are thousands of scientists who have looked at this. It's just, unfortunately, in some of these certain cases, like the ice sheet business, where they seem to have fallen down, and it may be, you know, something that is very difficult and on the cutting edge, that they're not going to be able to say much. But unfortunately, they should have done I think they could have done a better job of saying that we really don't know this. This is a very nonlinear problem, and maybe there's going to be big response even in 100 years. We don't, but we just can't evaluate it. But instead, they give some numbers and sort of mislead people into thinking that there's no problem. There's very little problem. I think we could have reacted to the knowledge that we had sooner. And that was the attempt with 10 years ago with Kyoto Protocol. Now, I think there are two reasons that have prevented this, that are particularly relevant. In the United States, and I think that our founding fathers would be very disappointed to see what has happened with the way our government is functioning. One of those things is one of those two things is the role of special interests. Our elections are not there is far too strong a role of special interests. You need money to win elections, and both in presidential elections and in congressional elections, there's too big a role for special interests. And they have had a huge role in the failure of the U.S. to be ready to address this problem. And the other thing is, again, which I think our founding fathers would be very disappointed, is the fact they assumed that we have an educated, informed public, and that has become much more difficult because sources of public information have been taken over for political purposes. The science agencies now have political appointees in the Office of Public Affairs, and the information that gets to the public is tainted by politics.
And do you feel optimistic? Do you think that it's something we can do? I mean, you've called specifically for us to take action within the next decade, for example.
Yeah, actually, we need to be on a different path within a decade, which means begin to get some actions within the next couple of years. And I think that there's certainly been a lot more indication in the last couple of years where more recognition that we need to do that. So I think that I'm optimistic that we can help we can avoid business as usual. But there's still going to be effects. I was surprised actually that already by the middle 1990s we had come as far as we appeared to be, and then we just didn't complete that. I think we should have realized some of these things a little earlier.
But certainly you were a very outspoken voice for this early on. I mean, it took IPCC till this year to say, very likely, and I think you said something like that maybe 20 years ago.
I think Jim Hansen is the last person who should feel guilty about not standing up on this issue.